All right, we'll give everyone a minute to join here. And I think we're in. It looks like, yeah, there's only one participant left that doesn't have an assignment, and I'm thinking that's Worley in the main room. So let's go ahead and get started. So you all were introduced to Eric in the larger session, but for this session, I'm extremely excited to hear what Eric has to say. And his presentation is What You Say and Why You Say It, the Power of Words and the Effects of Biased Language. And I don't know about all of you, but I know for me in the D&I space, it feels like the most pushback that I get comes from folks who say, oh, everything's so offensive these days. And I'm sure, Eric, you're going to touch on that. So without further ado, I'll turn that over to Eric Jorrey.
Thank you so much, Jessica. I appreciate it. And thank you, everybody, for joining me in this breakout group today. I really appreciate it. I'm going to definitely make sure that this hour is worth your time. And especially since we're a little on the smaller side too, I do have a few activities and we'll have some time today. So please chime in with either the chat or feel free to unmute yourself and ask a question or think about things. I've got a few activities that I'd like to engage in, once we get the bases down. And I tell you, Jessica, it might seem to everybody that Jessica and I planned this out before her introduction, and I promise you that we didn't. It's just so interesting, and I with what Jessica said about her own business and experience and what people come to her with, it's definitely really common in the United States today, even more so. And in fact, I actually wanted to kind of start our breakout group today with the exact thing that Jessica was actually talking about, where we think about what people are saying and how people are really affected by that as well. So if I move the video over here too. I am a sociologist. I teach sociology at Central Ohio Technical College. And as a sociologist, I am extremely interested in group dynamics and group thought. And we'll touch on, even as we are individuals here today, that we're part of something greater, whether we want to or not, whether we reject or accept labels, we are part of a fully functioning, interchanging society. And our society has trends. And even if there's exceptions to rules, we really can find a lot of value in looking at what the big picture items are. And I think a lot of people can kind of take this and use it with your own pursuit of having equity and everything too. And so with exactly what Jessica said, I did want to start off with some views on language today. This is a Pew Research Center study that is a couple years old. So it's 2019. And I think that you would probably see the numbers where they're at today, if not a little higher, where this nationally representative survey asks people, which of these statements, more accurately represents your views? Is it that, in today's age, do people need to be more careful about the language they use when they're discussing things with everybody? Or are too many people easily offended over the language other people use? Do people get offended too much today? You can see that is a very common attitude to have among the American public. 60%. And I've seen a few other more recent studies that put that at about 66, 67% of people think that people are too easily offended by language. And so we all have that common basis where as a public, we're starting to worry about, are things too offensive? But it's also important to remember that that's not everybody. And we have almost 40% of Americans that say people really do need to be more careful. Not surprisingly, we can see these attitudes are correlated and break down not only by race, but also by political ideology. When we talk about some of the political divides that we have today, notice that white individuals in this country are almost twice as likely to say that people are too easily offended than Black Americans are. How interesting is that? And you see that with so much data where when you have disadvantaged or marginalized groups, they are more likely to report the biases, the prejudice, the discrimination than any group that has the dominant status in society when it comes to power, prestige, and wealth. So it's really telling that attitude is actually felt more by white Americans. we see that attitude is also almost twice as likely to be held by either Republican or Republican leading individuals as it is for Democrat or Democratic leaning individuals. So we have this conversation we need to have about language. And especially as Dr. Love had mentioned, that we need to address language when we're looking at equitable outcomes and giving everybody that chance to realize their humanity and be their true self. So with this breakout room, we're going to get into the language specifics and effects, but I think we need to step back to start and kind of talk about our world a little bit. And this is the sociologist in me that's coming out with some things that I think are really useful to look at. Now,
hey, Eric, can you share full screen? We're seeing your sort of Microsoft.
Oh, you are still, yeah, let me go ahead there. Thank you, Jessica. I will, let's see, do the view here, and we will do normal, and then slideshow from current slide. There we go. Is that a little bit better?
Oh, that's perfect. Thank you.
Okay, excellent. So here we have our own use. You just saw a slide changed. My guess is this unusual picture probably jumped out at you first before all of the text that you actually see. We're drawn to those images. We're drawn to those darker and lighter shades of difference. And I'm curious, when I put this slide on, and especially when I maximize the screen, what do you see? You know, and anybody feel free to chime in. I'm guessing that we're all looking at the same picture right now.
This is going to sound really weird, but it looks a little bit like a skull, a little bit in the picture. That's just gonna...
Yeah. Do a few other people see the skull? I'll have to see if I can, see the chat. Yeah, I think that jumps out at me as well too. You can see the two eyes. It's kind of a freaky looking image. Did anybody? Yeah,
I see both. The skull and the two women, they look like older women from a different culture. They might be having lunch at a table.
Absolutely. Can everybody see that now? It totally looks like it's a woman, and as Patty said, an older woman having lunch at a table. We see that.
Two women.
Yeah. Oh, two women. See, I just threw some old by. Did I just say it was a mirror? I did. How interesting. I don't know if anybody else, did anybody else see a mirror?
I think if you spend more time, if you spend more time looking at it, you do see that it's a reflection.
That's so interesting. But with Patty seeing it, I can also see her perspective now, and I can see two different women maybe having lunch. But now that I look at it, is it lunch, or is it, if I see the mirror, now I see that maybe she's at like a makeup table. Are those like perfumes and powders that are sitting by her hand there? That's
I thought maybe it was a chess game.
Yeah. Oh, you know what? It almost like there is a queen. Yeah.
Right. It's like a vanity. If you look at the furniture, it looks like a vanity with a mirror.
Yeah,
the
like
old-fashioned type.
Yeah. So it's really not the chin of the skull underneath the teeth. It looks like a tablecloth almost, and you can see the table, and there might be a candle. I just noticed the chair. That's really cool, isn't it? I love optical illusions. I love being able to see things that it's the exact same picture, but look at all the interpretations. Now, if anybody here is wondering, okay, Eric, well, what's the correct answer? What is this a drawing of really? The answer is yes to everybody, and including myself. Even if I didn't see what Patty had seen, she's absolutely right. Isn't that kind of cool? So there is the issue that we are all looking at the same picture, everybody. This is an objective reality. This picture exists. We can look at the pixels on the computer. We can measure this. We can use our senses to see this picture. But how interesting that we see all of these differences in the same exact thing, and nobody is incorrect, and everybody has that correct view. And I also think it was really interesting that when you see something, whether it's the skull and then you start seeing the chin bone or the teeth or the nose cavity, or you see the two individuals and you start seeing lunch pieces or the chest set, this informs our reality. And how fascinating that all of us in this breakout room are looking at the exact same picture but are seeing different things. This concept very much applies to how we view things, not only like race and ethnicity, but gender and gender roles, sexual orientation, so many other facets of our society, freedom, responsibility. And that's because the viewpoints we have are a really good example of this idea of what social constructionism is. And with our talk of racial justice today, we have to start out saying that race as a concept is very much a social construction. It is not objectively real. It's based on how we have historically and currently defined, label, categorize people. And we're using those on some agreed upon physical characteristics, but also social characteristics as well. It's very important to kind of note that. I'm going to come back to this slide momentarily, but to kind of further look at that point of why race is not biologically real, that constructionism is something that we're all just a part of, and we've learned this and have been socialized. But when we really analyze it, we start having inconsistencies, to put it mildly. Just some examples of how race is a man-made concept. Historically in the US, when we were determining whether you were a slave or were a free individual, we would sometimes use the one drop rule, which basically said that if anybody in your family, any of your ancestors, a parent, a grandparent, a great grandparent was African American, then you by definition were as well. We also had the matrilineal rule that would say that, well, if mom is Black, then you are Black as well, you know, and there was some power differences for that. We, for indigenous Americans, for Native Americans, we had blood quantum laws. And if you ever look into these, they don't make logical sense. And just as an example, if you're talking about a particular tribe, it might be that if, you know, one parent is Native and the other isn't, you might be considered 50%. But then if one of your children and another 50% child is, they're also now 50%. And I don't think the percentages add up. Some tribes have said that it has to be at least 25% to be considered indigenous. Others are 1/8 or 1/16, and I've seen it go to even 1/32. So there's not a consistency there if we're talking about something real or biological. Probably one of the more infamous ones is before ending apartheid in South Africa, race was determined through this pencil test. When we had legalized segregation in South Africa between Black and white South Africans, the pencil test was as it sounds, is you would start a pencil and put it to the top of your head, and you would just slide it through your hair. And if the pencil went all the way through, you were categorized as a white person. If the pencil got stuck or could not be pulled through the hair, you were considered Black. You know, and think about that for a moment. If I give this example in class, sometimes I get the goofiest looks from my students. It seems like I'm making it up. You can please fact check me on that. There are plenty of personal accounts of that. Obviously, it's going on the secondary physical characteristic of hair. And we know that there are white people with curly hair or more coarse hair. We know that there are Black Americans with more thinner, straight hair. And so you can see how this, very much like this picture, our man-made ideology then kind of informs our viewpoint. And as silly as that pencil test sounds, there are documented cases that had real world effects because of this constructionism. The one that always jumps out to me is a white girl being dropped off at her white school by her white parents. And South African law said that, you could get an official and basically test somebody's racial identity when you wanted. So another parent thought this child maybe wasn't white, so they had a school official conduct the pencil test. The student was unable to put it through, and that student then was removed from the school, which was a white-only school, which is pretty unbelievable. But then taking it a step further, because there was residential segregation as well. And later on, that child, for failing that pencil test, was actually removed from her white parents, her white biological parents, and placed in a Black-only foster home. So the real point with this is that even though we might see reality different or use things that seem not very logical in some cases, it doesn't mean that the consequences aren't very much real when things are going on. If we look at multiracial individuals, even today, it's so fascinating to see if somebody is of multiple ethnic or racial background, whether it's biracial or multiracial. There are so many factors that determine how that individual views themselves. Even if it's former President Barack Obama, who, when he fills out his census form, he identifies as an African American, even though he has a biological parent who is white, of European descent. That shows that constructionism. Research has shown that things like neighborhood dynamics, if you're multiracial in a predominantly white neighborhood, you are significantly more likely to identify yourself as white. The opposite is true as if you are in a predominantly African-American neighborhood. Social class makes a difference. School dynamics make a difference. Education levels. So it's really interesting to look at how everything is really constructed here. And it ties back again to this unique picture here, to where we have our objective and subjective realities. If it's objective, we can scientifically verify it. We can use our 5 senses to show that it is absolutely there. If it's a subjective reality, then on the other hand, there's not a definitive state of being. We're using our own opinion, our own interpretation, as we do with race. And sometimes that subjective reality might not have a connection to the objective reality that we actually have. With the picture of our individuals here, to put the idea of race to the biggest test, I always think is, here you have a married husband and wife with their 5 children. The youngest 2 girls here that are sitting on mom's lap are biological twins. We can look at these biological twins, as they were little girls here, and when they have reached adulthood. And again, the way that we construct race, we obviously see these 2 individuals as a different race. Maybe people don't see it as fast as others. There could be some differences because of that subjectivity with things. These girls themselves will tell you that they have had very different treatment, that people will react to them. They think they're lying sometimes when they say not only that they're sisters, but that they are twin sisters and that they are twin biological sisters. It shows that race is very much subjective, even if we want to base it on what we think of as the biological effects. For any individual that says, well, Eric, what about pigmentation? Isn't that biology? The color of your skin is a biological objective reality. And to that, I would say, yes, the pigmentation is absolutely biological, but the color of your skin based on pigment is a different concept than race. And it's different than how we've used race historically and even currently as well. So even if we have the biological components that we put in there, and we know that in the United States, the skin tone is a racial indicator along with many other things, it still shows that gap between, scientists can find, pigmentation differences, levels of certain other enzymes and chromosomes and things of that nature. But race itself is still a social construction. You can look at the genetic makeup of 2 entirely cut off different racial groups, and you will not be able to find variation between them. You'll find more variation within the group than you will the group as a whole. So taking that knowledge of our subjective and objective realities here, let's kind of put this to the test to think about what we think, which then can kind of inform our language and our viewpoint here, everybody. I'm going to hit you with a few other numbers here really quick. According to a Gallup poll from about 20 years ago even, we see that on average, your average American says that about 33% of the US population is Black. We know that the objective reality of that is approximately 14%. Depending on the data, 12 to 14%. We know that that's an objective reality because we have valid, reliable data when it comes to reporting this. We can look at the racial composition of the US and say that this is the amount. So, but notice that people's view of that doesn't sometimes match reality. Notice that up to 17% of Americans in this poll thought that the United States was either 50% or more of African Americans. You only have about 7% in this poll stating the reality here. We see that too with our LGBT population as well. In 2015, if you can see my cursive here, the average American thought that the United States was about 23% LGBT Americans. The actual number is around 5% today. And again, with the way the question was asked, this isn't even including bisexual individuals or transgender individuals. It's just asking, what percent of Americans are gay or lesbian? And so, wow, more than 1 out of 4 Americans think that more than a third of Americans or a third of Americans are not heterosexual. And that's their viewpoint to think that and what they're going on and basing their reality, but it's not based on our objective data. It's not the way that the world is. If we think of our lady in skull picture, it would kind of be like saying that, yeah, did you see the rainbow colors in that? It was so interesting that there was a raccoon in the corner. We might start to question that person's interpretation more so than some of the other things. We would want them to maybe justify it a little bit as well. So, not only do we have the racial and the orientation differences, if we're talking about Muslim Americans, here's a Forbes and Statista poll that asks various countries with these representative samples, out of every 100 people in your country, how many are Muslim? And you can see that in the United States, your average guess is about 17, which would make the United States population 17% Muslim. Our objective reality of that is about 1% of Americans practice Islam. So just think for a second that your average American overestimates the amount of Muslims that are in the United States by 17%. Your average American thinks there are 17 times more Muslim Americans than there actually are. So what accounts for this gap in reality sometimes? A lot of times it can be the biases that you have and that I have. And so the fascinating thing to look at when we think about bias and how it can affect our language and our views of racial issues in the United States is that we all have them. And I hate to break it to everybody here that everybody in this breakout room is most definitely biased. I am as well. And we see evidence, we can change and modify some of our biases, and a big key is being aware of them, but it's really tough psychologically to get rid of all of them. We could talk about implicit biases the whole rest of this breakout room. There is a lot of really interesting information out there. We have our scientifically tested studies for a variety of ways that show that a lot of our biases are sometimes unconscious. And I think that's really important moving forward, where when we're looking at racial diversity in the workplace or in our communities, and we think, well, racism happened in the past because I don't see a lot of swastika flags in the windows. I don't know anybody that's in the Klan. We've kind of moved past it. That's that sort of overt reality. But just saying, saying, yes, I don't discriminate against anybody That's you consciously trying to do that. Implicitly, is it different? Do you have these split-second subconscious views that sort of favor one group over the other? So we all have our implicit biases that we could talk about as well. Some of the others, maybe a little bit lesser known, that I wanted to kind of talk about as it relates to language and the way that we interact with everybody and how we're kind of pursuing, you know, these equitable outcomes, is we see so much evidence of what's known as this Dunning-Kruger effect. And this effect, and what Dunning-Kruger is, it's the tendency for people that aren't as informed, with a lower level of knowledge, not intelligence, mind you, but just knowledge or information, that those with a low level, they think that they know more than they do. And then consequently, the other part of this effect is that individuals who have a very high level of knowledge or a lot of experience with a situation or a topic, a lot of times they think that they know less than they do. And Dunning-Kruger is a fascinating effect that we see, not only when it comes to racial issues, but just a lot of topics in the United States. I think this graphic kind of helps looking at this effect here, to where here we have, you know, how much knowledge in the given field you have. And then we kind of compare that with how confident you are that what you are saying is correct. And we can see this definitive curve to where, you know, with a lot of confidence and not very much knowledge, it's, yeah, I know everything about that. You know, you get a little bit more knowledge and education. Yeah, okay, there's a little bit more to this. It's starting to make sense after a few more years of experience, and you get into that high knowledge, and trust me, it's complicated. And I can tell you, if I stop the share momentarily here, everybody, I can attest to being a victim of the Dunning-Kruger effect as well. When I was 18 years old and wanting to save the world and make a difference and choosing sociology and just wanting to make communities better, I thought answers were so simple. I'd get a couple of theories, and this is why crime happens. This is why people behave the way they do. All we need to do is this. And so I go and getting my post-secondary degrees and doing actual field research and really diving into the data. All these years later, I should be more confident than ever than I was 20 years ago. And trust me, I feel less most times. When somebody asks me about these issues, or what can I do with my kids to make sure they don't get in trouble, I've got about 25 follow-up questions I need to ask before I give an informed answer. And then I'm always saying, well, in some situations, or we can be confident, you know, we're 95% of the time. And we're always talking about the limitations of our study. I've done it today where, notice this data is a little bit old, you know, as opposed to saying this is what's happening. And so that's Dunning-Kruger. You know, it's really interesting. Over the last year with the pandemic, when you see an epidemiologist with 40 years of experience talking about what the virus is going to do, did you notice they're not going, this is what's happening, I'm the smartest man when it comes to infectious diseases, and this is exactly what's going to happen, trust me. I never heard any of them say that, who have the specialty of the years, because they're always kind of saying, well, now we got to wait here and see, and this could be different. But then with any of you with social media accounts, do you know some electricians, for example, that spent 5 minutes online and can tell you exactly what's going to happen with the coronavirus? You know, that's the Dunning-Kruger effect as well too. So again, we're all in some ways susceptible to it, and we really just kind of have to be aware of this effect.
Eric, I had a question.
Yeah.
That survey about the perceptions of, you know, the populations, it was from 20 years ago. Have you been able to find anything that's current? Because I just wonder how much it had changed, if any.
Yeah, I use that because it's the most valid one that I've been able to see. Pew is fantastic, but sometimes they kind of stop asking questions over years or find it. And I've seen some studies that still show a discrepancy, but I don't know if it's as much or higher because the sample size is so small, if that makes sense. So I can definitely get back to you, Marilyn, and see if it is, because it would be really interesting now, you know, especially with our focus on immigration and how diversity is taking more of a national spotlight with things. it'd be interesting to think, do Americans overrepresent that number more than they did 20 years ago? You know?
Or conversely, there's more discussion about how percentages of Black people are arrested and the poor outcomes, you know, that there is more discussion when you talk about the percentages as they compare to whites, you know, so I think
yeah,
maybe people are more informed, I'm not sure, but I want you to continue, so thank you.
You know, and you're absolutely right as well too, where we can really see that difference. I just know slightly anecdotally as well, having my students do some assignments where they actually interview friends and family about some of these social issues. I have never before seen so many people saying, you know, yes, there are biases in the criminal justice system, and yes, there are situations where Blacks have historically and currently are treated less fair than whites. It's noticeably different with a lot of the answers that my students are giving. So it's definitely something to think about as well too.
That's encouraging.
It is. It definitely is too. I have to say though too that we still see some really large racial divides too. Just like the sensitive language graphic we looked at the beginning of our breakout group, there are like enormous differences in the attitudes of Black Americans and white Americans when it comes to the police. White Americans are more than twice as likely to view the police as honest, as trustworthy. And that's our objective reality. I know people are giving their opinion, but being able to code and scientifically validate people's viewpoints to say that there are those differences, whether you agree with it or not, it's what people think, and we're going to have to be conscious of that moving forward, you know, regardless of your own viewpoints. And speaking of our own viewpoints, we see confirmation bias a lot in our language, even if it's about offensiveness or what to say or when we say it to individuals as well. And this is just when we basically seek out stuff that affirms our own beliefs. If you are, for example, anti-death penalty, you probably spend a lot more time reading anti-death penalty articles online than you do looking at the flip side of that, you know, if that makes sense. So it looks like, did you guys see this message here? I hate to interrupt myself, but are we are having our breakout room closed?
Looks like it's saying in 60 seconds it'll close.
Yeah, we shouldn't be. We're supposed to be in here until around 11, so I wonder if it's done in error.
Yeah, we could probably ignore it and see what happens.
All right, that sounds good. I'm just going to X that out of the effect then as well. So we have our confirmation biases where we seek out our previously held viewpoints. As an example of that, if I stop the slideshow here, I have a quick question for everybody here. I've got a puzzle for everybody here. And if we
I feel like we were supposed to have a little